A few years ago, some random guy contacted me on Instagram. The guy was nice enough, and eventually he sent me his number. We started talking on the phone, but from the get-go, he seemed a little off. He started getting angry if I didn't pick up the phone, and eventually I just blocked him. But suddenly, I'd be getting calls from a different number, and it was always him. I blocked around 4 numbers before the calls just finally stopped. Then, a few months later, he messaged me on Instagram from a new account. In the message, he basically stated that either I send him nude images of myself with slut written all over my body, or he would send my nudes to my family, work and friends. I didn't understand what he meant by him saying that he'd send my nudes because I knew that he didn't have any of me. So I ignored the message, but an hour later, he sent me an image. He had found a girl who looked very similar to me, actually. And honestly, it was just because I knew that I never took any pictures, that the woman was definitely not me. Otherwise, she was the spitting image. I reverse image searched the photo and found the actual woman in the pictures. But still, I was obviously pretty scared. He could send out this woman's image and say it was me. And while I could message everyone and let them know that it wasn't, I'm 100% sure that not everyone would believe me and think that I'm covering up the fact that I send images to strangers online. But my family is actually pretty conservative at best, so this was really getting to me. I go into this man's profile, and I remember a cold sweat coming over me as I saw that the people he followed were all the people that I follow, and basically everyone I know. I didn't know what to do except message the guy back with a threat to go to the police. He deleted the messages that he sent me, and I deleted my Instagram account and instead began using my personal account, which is now set to private. On my account, I also blocked the man's profile, and I just hope that he never finds me again. But the internet can be a dangerous place, and I still have no idea how he got all the information about my friends and family. This was quite a while ago, so please bear with me. I was a sophomore in high school, finishing our band practice, and it was in the afternoon, maybe 7:30, and me and my friends are talking for a bit. We always chatted a bit after practice to avoid the crowd of people in the band hall. Plus, it gave us a chance to unwind a bit. We see one of our friends, a freshman, talking to his dad and his little sister. Now, none of us had never spoken to his dad before, but we had heard things and knew he was just a bit, shall we say, off. So that's why we didn't really question what happened next. My friend was chatting for quite a bit, and finally, the dad calls us over. Now, the guy my friend is talking to looks remarkably like him. Same hair, same skin tone, very similar mannerisms too, and the guy is pretty greasy looking, and he seems visibly uncomfortable and is obviously in a huge hurry to get out of there. But he was shuffling about and won't keep eye contact. And he seems to be eyeing us up in a strange way. But again, he's our friend's dad, and we knew that he was pretty strange, and so we were not really thinking much of the whole situation. He talks about how he wants us, me and 3 of my friends, all trombonists, to play for him in a Cuban jazz ensemble that he's putting together, apparently. We're all pretty big into jazz at this time, and he mentions how we'll be getting paid for both practices and performances, and we're all very excited. He's really insistent on us leaving with him that moment to meet the rest of his bandmates, and me and my friends are all for it. Now, we haven't really been noticing this girl that was standing next to him this whole time. She's been really quiet this whole conversation, but that she was very visibly uncomfortable with the whole situation. The LBN director had noticed us by this time and walks on over. She was a very no-bullshit, hard-ass kind of person. She comes and asks, "Who's this guy?" Then, of course, I think she's mad because we've been taking our time and putting our stuff away, so I just respond, "Well, he's our friend's dad, and he..." And right then, my friend cuts me off and says, "What? He's not my dad." Now, at this point, the man gets very irritated. Our director tells him that he needs to leave, and this is when I start noticing the little girl more. First of all, she looks nothing like this man. This is pure conjecture on my part, but her skin color, her eye color, hair color, none of them matched him. The man starts arguing with my director, saying how she can't talk to him like that, and he seems like he's about to punch our director, in fact. By this point, he's attracted some attention, and our two other directors are here as well. The little girl is grabbing him by the shirt, trying to keep him back. She's not crying, but her voice seems like she's about to. She's pleading for him to stop and asks him to please just go home. Now, this is the first time the girl spoke to me, and so this is when I first get a good look at her. And she was really, really thin, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and is younger than us by maybe a couple of years. She also has some pretty obvious bruises, and as mentioned above, looks nothing like a dad. Finally, it seems the man's given up, and he's attracted quite a crowd, and he shuffles off. He doesn't really run to his car, but he goes off as fast as he can without actually running, tugging the little girl at his side. They call the cops, and the cops circle the area looking for him or his car, but there's no sign, and we never saw him again. After the incident, we spoke to our friend about it, and he mentioned how the little girl approached him first and tried to get him to get into their car before the man finally got out of the car and started to talk to my friend himself. I'm still not too sure what was going on that day. I don't know what would have happened to us had we gotten in the car with him as planned, but it definitely psyched me out for a bit, and I had completely forgotten about the incident until I was browsing Reddit and stuff, and it all just came back to me. Finally, I'd like to add that we've since met the friend in question's dad, and they actually look remarkably similar, which is kind of a weird coincidence. Whatever happened that day, it still sits with me really uncomfortably. So, this happened about 3 or 4 years ago when I was on a holiday at the West Lake in Hangzhou in China. I live in Beijing for reference, and I do speak Chinese. My girlfriend and we had been walking around the lake for a couple of hours, and I needed to go to the toilet, so we were looking for a public bathroom. It's a pretty touristy area, so after another couple of minutes of walking, we finally found one. Inside the bathroom, there were 2 urinals on each wall, so they came together in a kind of L shape. But nobody else was in there at the time, and I headed to one of the urinals closer to the corner, and as I was trying to pee, I saw somebody to my right in my peripheral vision. They were just stood in the way, but it didn't feel right, so I turned my head, and it's this homeless guy. The dirty torn clothes, messy matted hair, dirt all over his hands and face, and he was just staring at my junk. I was obviously kind of taken aback, so I just said to him in Chinese, "What are you looking at?" And without moving his eyes away, he replied, "You." His answer really unsettled me a bit, and I just said, "Well, could you not, man?" Right after I said that, somebody else comes into the urinal on my left, and in that high-pitched voice that you use to mock people, he goes, well, could you not?" I look over at him, and it's another dirty, homeless-looking guy who also starts looking at me. I was really quite shaken at this point, and far too nervous to pee there, so I zipped up and fast walked from the urinal to a cubicle where I locked the door. I tried to pee again, but I heard a sound. The locks were those kinds where there's a slit on the outside bit that you can open with a coin in. I didn't think about that until I turned around and saw the first homeless guy just looking at me from outside the now open cubicle. I think he was just smiling, but that might have been just my mind making it creepier in retrospect. And well, peeing was definitely off the cards at this point. I actually ran out of the bathroom, found my girlfriend, and we power walked for about 15 minutes to get away from those creepy fuckers. So this happened when I was about 7 years old to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I want to share his story. Growing up, I lived in northern Michigan on 5,000 acres of farm and ranch land that backed up into state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pastures could be seen, and needless to say, it pretty much made us tough, and it takes a lot to spook all of us now. But we're all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen, and being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy, and I'm still the same. My uncle, he went off to join the military, becoming a senior NCO in a prominent Special Forces division of the US Navy. He was about 6'4", built like a wrestler, obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing ever rattled him. He was home on leave, and we went out hunting as it was deer season. I remember him coming in the house and just shaking and crying and saying that he saw something in the woods. My uncle, he never cried. I mean, he was as tough as nails and would tear someone to shreds before he'd let them make him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he just kept saying that he saw Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My granny immediately got my grandfather, and he rounded up the rest of the guys hunting. My dad, a few male cousins, and my uncle, who was still terrified but went because he didn't want to be labeled a chicken, and they got all their shotguns and ammunitions and saddled the horses to clear the woods. Apparently, they were aware of this dog man, but I was blissfully young and ignorant at the time. They told me to stay inside, and for no reason was I to step outside of the house until they returned. I had never heard my dad and grandfather so serious, so I just hid in my room. Sunset comes and they still aren't back. I'm really worried at this point because they've never stayed in the woods until after dark. Shortly after, though, I heard the sound of horses running to the barn and their voices, and man, was I relieved. They looked troubled, though, when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably to not spook me. At dinner, though, my dad laid down the law, and I was no longer allowed to play outside or go to the barns alone. I had to have my grandfather with me at all times. Of course, I was upset by this and felt my independence was being taken away from me, but I obeyed. The next morning, my dad and grandfather taught me how to shoot, and after that, I knew it was pretty serious. I actually overheard the adults talking the next night, too. Apparently, there were tracks where my uncle had his sighting of this wolf thing, and they were definitely dog tracks. As I said before, we're avid outdoorsmen and hunters, and we can definitely identify tracks easy, but this one, it was difficult to identify. And about 8 foot up in a tree were these claw marks. No Michigan bear could make those, but we also found claw marks of about the same height on multiple trees throughout our property. Had cattle mutilated, and not in the way a coyote or bear would, and it lasted that whole winter. But we actually lost about 30 to 40 cattle that winter, and all of them were mutilated. All with the same wolf dog tracks in the snow, too. I really feel like this experience kind of changed my outcall. He did multiple tours in the Middle East for Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom before he, well, took his own life. But after that experience, he was just never the same. He went from not ever drinking to never seeing him without a bottle of Jack, and his eyes were always haunted. He changed his personality and never went out in the woods again. He quit hunting and he eventually just quit coming home to visit on leave. He didn't even come home for my dad's funeral 2 years later. Honestly, it was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way that he did. And I truly believe that he saw something out there. And ultimately, it did kill him. A little while back, I decided that I needed to get back out there and start trying to meet people. Not necessarily actively looking for a relationship or anything, but meeting people at the bars just, it wasn't working for me, so, as most single college girls do, I downloaded a dating app. I met a lot of people and talked to them online, and it gave me the confidence to try and actually go out on a date every now and then. I didn't meet up with many of these guys in person, but there were a few. Most didn't lead to a second date, but there was one that was worse than the rest. I met this guy, Alex, and we made plans to go out to dinner. He said that he wanted to take me to this nice restaurant in the town between us, but when the day came, he never answered his phone. The next day, he contacts me with a story about getting stuck at work and forgetting his phone at home. Whatever. Excuses, and I wasn't really buying it, but he asked to reschedule. And stupidly enough, I said yes. So the day comes and he tells me to meet him at his house and he'll drive us to the restaurant that he made reservations at. He said to come hungry like 3 times and kept reminding me not to eat beforehand. I guess this place has big plates or something. Now, I don't really like meeting people for the first time at their home or getting into their car, but we had been talking for over a week, so I figured what the hell. But when I got close, he calls and tells me to park in the parking lot down the road. Weird, but okay. A small driveway, I guess, or something. The trouble is, I never told him what kind of car I drove, but he pulled into the parking lot right behind me and texted saying that he was parked 2 spots down from me. And that was red flag number 1. So I get in his car against my better judgment and we start heading for the restaurant. Now, I didn't know where we were exactly, and I'm not really familiar with the town, but I know the restaurant that we were heading to, and it shouldn't have been more than like 10 minutes away on a major highway. But almost 25 minutes later, we're driving down some dark back road, so I looked at him and said, "Hey, where the hell are we going anyway?" And he proceeded to tell me that he hadn't told me the full story. Apparently, when he called to make reservations, it took 3 times of calling before they actually answered. And when someone finally did answer, they told him that they had moved locations and given him a description of where they were now located, like an intersection or something. My stomach dropped when I realized that we had passed that intersection probably 5 minutes before this point, and I realized that he didn't have an address punched into his GPS, even though the GPS was running. Obviously, that was red flag number 2. So I pulled up my GPS, punched in the name of the restaurant, and it said the business was closed for the day. Red flag number 3. At this point, yeah, I know I was being stupid, but I stayed and we hung out and talked and got to know each other. Still, the way he went about things was really creepy. When he couldn't find the restaurant, he just kind of said, "Don't worry, I know a place that we can go," and drove farther into the darkness, eventually pulling over to a trail in the woods and told me that we had to walk the rest of the way. He said that we were going to go stargazing, and the spot was beautiful and all, but the whole way through the woods to the clearing, he just kept cracking jokes about how he swore that he wasn't a serial killer or something, and telling me to promise that I wasn't going to steal his keys and take the car and leave him there. Red flag number 4. Now, I'm not sure how to explain this, but through half the night, he just kept lying to me. He would tell me these big, elaborate, detailed stories and then suddenly end with, "Just kidding, that never happened." It was funny the first time when he tried to convince me that he got so drunk one night at college that he got his penis pierced. But after 2 hours of this shit, I realized he had been just kidding about almost everything that he'd said. I realized that I didn't even really know any true thing about this guy. Red flag number 5. And yes, I know I'm an idiot. We were talking about going to watch a movie at his house at some point, and he was all for it. But then, apparently changed his mind and pulled the car over in front of a park suddenly on the way back. He said that he'd rather stay here, and he kept trying to dare me to run through the park naked, asked me weirdly sexual, personal questions, like about specific experiences, not even general thoughts or preferences or anything, but actual experiences. And suddenly, he demanded to know if I was going to kiss him or not before the night was over, and said that he wanted to put on chapstick first. This guy literally made me dig through my purse, looking for chapstick, while he sat on the driver's seat making a big show of licking his lips and trying to subtly rub himself through his pants. I told him that I didn't have any chapstick, so he said that that was fine, but why don't you crawl on over here and show me what you got? A cue patting his lap. I told him that I wasn't comfortable with that, and he then proceeded to reach around me and try to drag me into his lap, using my butt as leverage. I told him again that I had no intention of sleeping with him or anyone on a first date, and he began to say that that was fine, but how about a little minute or two of a preview? A cue dragging my handle to his lap. That was obviously the final red flag, and sirens are culling off in my head now. I got mad at this point, and this was after he'd spent days telling me how much he hates men who try to force themselves upon women, and how he doesn't understand how anyone could do that, let alone get pleasure from it. This, after he said that he didn't want to sit too close to me while we were stargazing, so he didn't make me feel uncomfortable too. It was honestly like a switch had flipped or something. I told him that trying to force me wasn't going to make me any more likely to agree, and that I thought that he was supposed to be a gentleman and all one, like he'd been telling me all the night that he was. He told me that he thought that I was scared of how big it was, and if I didn't want to, do anything with it, there were other options. Again, he tries to grab my hand. I told him again that this wasn't going to happen, and he pouted about it. I was racking my brain, trying to think of an excuse to get him to drive me back to my car, when he pulled out his phone, opened a text message thread, and then looks at me and says that he got a text from his uncle that he lived with, saying that something had happened at the house and he needed to get home ASAP. Obviously, I'm done at this point, doubtless, but I hate being lied to. If you weren't having a good time, you could have just asked to call it a night. But why lie? Why make up false intentions and then deliberately act the exact opposite way of what you said? Just why? But to make things worse, he dropped me off at my car in a dark parking lot at midnight and then just drove off before I had even walked to my car. Obviously, there was not going to be a second date with this guy. But the kicker is that I drove by the old location of the restaurant a few days ago, and it had never moved. it's still open and right on the highway. And his house about 2 minutes down the road. Well, that was non-existent too. So, where the hell was this guy taking me? So this happened when I was about 5 years old. I have 6 siblings, a big fat Greek family, and we lived in a normal safe suburban area in the Midwest. My mum had always drilled into my head and my siblings' heads not to talk to strangers, especially adult strangers. She would always say if an adult is ever asking anything from a child, something is probably wrong. Anyway, I was playing outside with my older sister, but she would have been 7 at the time. Our house was on a corner, so we had the main road and then the road leading into the neighborhood. We had just got our first family dog, and she was a beagle, so she was tiny, and we had her tied up to one of our trees. I remember being by the puppy and playing with her by myself for a little bit, and at that point, she was only about a month or 2 old. A gold sedan pulled up along the road, but leading into the neighborhood, and a grown man got out, probably in his mid-30s, and he called out to me, and it went like this. "Hey, that's my dog." No it's not. This is our dog. Her name is Corky." "No, really, that's my dog. I lost her, and I've been looking everywhere for her. Come here, I have a picture of my dog, and I'll show you, and you can see that it's mine." I distinctly remember taking 2 steps forward, and then all sorts of alarms started going off, and I couldn't say anything. At this point, my sister had noticed too, and came over, and was standing beside me as I was just shaking my head no to the man. My brother had been in charge of babysitting my sister and I, and must have heard the conversation from inside because he ran outside and started yelling at the guy, asking if there was a fucking problem. At that point, the man got in his car real quick and sped off. I always wondered just how different my life would be today if I had been too naive of what horrible things adults are capable of back then. So I'm super grateful to my big brother who saved my ass that day, and to my mum who made me paranoid for good reasons. These events took place over a couple of months. It still haunts me to this day, and is a lot of the reason why I am the way I am. A little backstory first. I have 5 siblings, 6 of us total, and when this happened, my oldest brother was 14, so I would have been 3 at the time, given that we are 11 years apart. I'm the baby of the family. This happened at a very fragile time in my parents' marriage. My dad, but definitely, was not the best father, and had actually cheated on my mother a number of times. For the record, I've asked my siblings to write this since they were older at the time, but no one has, so I'll recount it to the best of my ability. There was a lot more that happened, but I'll talk about 3 occurrences that stuck with me. I was eating something with my sister, watching TV with her at night, and the rest of my siblings and my parents weren't home. We only had 1 car at the time, and my mum had to go pick up my dad and leave us at the home sometimes. I remember going into the kitchen to throw something away with my sister, but we had a big window in the kitchen and the garbage was right beside it. My sister screamed, and we both noticed a man's face pressed up against the glass, looking in at us with a flashlight and smiling. My mother soon got home, and we told her what had happened. She flipped out and called the cops, and also told my neighbors to keep an eye out. This actually happened a number of times, and it turned out to be multiple men too. And strangely enough, they always seemed to get away right before the cops got to us, or right before my mum got home. I remember her cutting down the bushes in front of our house because these men would actually hiding them. I also remember them breaking one of our windows in our kitchen at one point. On a separate night, I remember being alone with my one brother and one sister closest in age to me. They would have been 4 and 6, I think. I don't know why we were alone, but I do remember it distinctly. The men, they came back and were pounding on our front door and throwing things at our windows. All 3 of us ran into my parents' room upstairs and locked the door. I remember crying with my sister, and my brother telling us not to cry, and that we could pretend to be other people, brave people, so that we wouldn't be scared anymore. Surprisingly, it actually worked, and my parents got home soon after that. But we were literally on lockdown at this point, and I was terrified of everyone. My brother also tells me one night that the phone rang right when my mum had left to get my dad, and he answered it, and it was one of the men, and he laughed and said, "You people are so fucking stupid," and just hung up. One of the last nights that this went on, I remember being in bed and my sister waking me up and taking me with her to the landing of our stairs. Our stairs faced our front door, and my brother was sitting on the landing pointing a shotgun at the front door, and all my siblings were huddled beside him. I didn't know what was happening, or even really what a gun was, but I knew that whatever was going down was really bad. I sat down next to my siblings, and no one talked. I remember having a stupid T-Rex toy that I was playing with, and it was as if time had stood still, but then, there it was. The man, banging on our front door and yelling things outside. I don't know why or if the men had done it, but our front door was unlocked. It felt like forever when, finally, my brother spoke, and all he said was, "Come in," while pointing the shotgun. All the sounds stopped, and we just sat there and waited. But no one ever came through the door. My parents got home soon after, and my dad actually caught one of these guys and beat the absolute shit out of the guy. The cops came soon after all of this and told us that they had news. Apparently, our phone lines were being tapped, and that's how the guys always knew when we were alone at the house. I don't know if the cops knew or charged any of these men with anything, and my mum doesn't like talking about it because she's a different person than she was 20 years ago. And now that I'm older, I realise that we never should have been left alone at the time. Period. But my mum was not well, and she was madly in love with my dad and was obsessed with making sure that he wasn't cheating. A lot of the time that this was going on, that she wasn't picking him up, that she was actually watching him at work and making sure that he wasn't cheating, all the while leaving the 6 of us alone to fend for ourselves. I realise how insanely selfish this is, but I've forgiven my mum for it. She's still with my dad, and I'm working on a better relationship with both of them at the moment. Looking back, yet, it doesn't feel real. I mean, we found out all of this happened from a psycho bitch that my dad cheated with, who got her loser middle-aged guy friends to terrorize a bunch of children. But for the record, I actually found this woman and sent her the nastiest message a few years ago when I turned 19. But this stuff, it kind of keeps me up at night sometimes. I'm hyper-alert to sounds and am extremely paranoid at night, especially when I'm alone. These pieces of shit impacted my life in such a way that they'll never know. But through it all, my siblings have remained really close, and that my brother is a super badass for stepping up and caring for us the way he did. He still tries to this day to be our protector, though, that we've all grown up by now. I now realize that what's important is that none of us were hurt because, man, it could have gone so terribly wrong in so many ways. I often wonder if that guy would have come in, actually, and also wonder what these loser guys are doing now that they're in their 50s. Regardless, I hope I never see them again because, honestly, I may just kill them. I lived in the historic district of Suffolk, VA. Not the best place, but hey, what can you do? We lived in an older Victorian-style home, and I was about 15 at the time. It was a 3-story home, about 3,000 square feet, I think. So you couldn't necessarily hear anything from the other side of the house, most of the times anyway. As you walk into the house, you see the L-shaped stairs to your right, and there's an archway right ahead of you looking into the den, and the archway to your left looks into the living room. From the top of the stairs, you could see straight down to the door in the living room. So, me and my 3 best friends, Kay, Anna and Elle, were in a game room at the top of the stairs with my mum. It was about 10 p.m. and we spent the day at my house, and Kay, who was 17, was going to drive us all back to her house to watch her house while her mum was at her boyfriend's house overnight. I had, and rest in peace of sweet soul, a pure white German Shepherd named Angel, who was about 15 at the time. She barely ever barked, and it was kind of a large lapdog, if I'm honest. My mum was taking a picture of all 4 of us on the couch when we heard Angel bark, really loudly, and started to growl too. We knew immediately that something was wrong, and my mum told us to be quiet and turned off the light of the room that we were in and told us not to move off the couch, so as not to alert anything going on downstairs, if there even was anything. We immediately shut our loud teenager mouths and heard my mum going down the hallway. We then hear my mum scream, "Get the fuck out of my house, you son of a bitch." My mum is not a scared, scream your head off kind of woman, and I knew that. So I go to the hall to see my mum gripping a steak knife that she kept in the dresser right by the top of the stairs, and I hear the front door slam and thumps on my porch, and my mum runs down the stairs and turns on the security alarm, which wasn't on because we had just come in from hanging outside. But my mum runs up the stairs and tells us what she saw, and it shook us all to the core. Apparently, she saw a tall man, a bandana on, a beanie on, boots, and a rope around his shoulder and arm, creeping in and starting to approach the stairs. She said she startled him, and he ran out quickly, but asked us if we would stay there with her tonight, as my dad was on deployment and my little brother and sister were already asleep. Kay immediately called her mum and told her what was going on, and she said that she didn't really have a problem with Kay staying back with us for a little while at least. So, whoever the hell tried to do whatever to 5 women that you knew were home alone, fuck you. And thank you to my beautiful dog. Who knows what would have happened if she didn't bark and alert us beforehand. So this just happened a few days ago, and I'm extremely shaken up by it. There's some backstory. I live on the 2nd floor of a 3-level apartment. We have a crawl space that connects all the apartments, and we aren't sure why it's there, but we have all this stuff in it, and none of us would ever even attempt to go inside of it, so we felt that it was pretty safe. The other night, the sun was setting, but it wasn't pitch black out or anything yet. I'm walking through the living room when I see a short woman on my fire escape looking into my windows. This is obviously extremely bizarre, considering that it's still semi-light out and she had to literally get out onto our fire escape somehow. We have 2 windows that the fire escape reaches, and she was looking in both but didn't see me. I quickly crawled onto the ground, and my heart was racing as I watched her try to open the windows. I didn't know what the hell to do because my phone was in the other room. But after what felt like an eternity, she finally left. I went into my room to get my phone to text my landlord and call the cops, and I came back into the living room and was looking at the windows to see if I could locate her when, all of a sudden, I hear a weird noise coming from my ceiling. We have one of those tile ceilings made out of separate slabs of cork and wood. I look up to see one of the slabs lifted up and two eyes staring at me. I have no idea how she got into the crawl space so quickly, but I grabbed the nearest thing next to me, which was a broom, and started hitting her with it through the ceiling and called the cops as soon as she crawled away. They showed up and searched the place and didn't find her until a few days later when she was on somebody else's fire escape. The cops said that she was definitely on some kind of hard drug and that she was actually violent towards them. So, I don't know if I escaped something or if it was a near miss, but man, when I saw her eyes up in the ceiling like that, it was freaky. This happened 4 years back. I was about 14 years old, and my parents were out and had left me and my little sister, 10 at the time, home alone. It was about 10 or 11 p.m. when the lights go out. And this used to happen sometimes in my country, since it's kind of a new country and it's really poor here. But that time, I noticed something out of the ordinary. Only the lights in our house were out, and my neighbours, their lights were on. I had a bad feeling, so I quickly locked all the doors and closed the blinds. I told my sister to hide behind the couch and not to go out whatever happened. I hid somewhere else with a knife and tried to call my mum, but she didn't pick up, so I just sat there and waited. After sitting there for a while, I thought it was over, so I get out of my hiding place and head to the kitchen, where we had the back door to look out the window. Before I get close, I hear the doorknob turning. It doesn't work, so the person on the other side tries it again, now violently. And that's when I panicked and I shouted, "Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck out of my house. I've called the police." I hear quick footsteps and then nothing. I went to the other room and looked out the window, and I saw someone running out of my backyard. My sister was crying, so I comforted her while we still stayed hid until my parents came home after an hour. We told them everything, and my dad said that whoever that was, he had intentionally cut the house's electricity to scare us or something. To this day, every time the electricity goes out, I still get kind of scared, and I'm glad that we're all okay. Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, NH. Some of my best childhood memories were actually made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousins and neighbouring kids in the campground made it excellent. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years that I was there, this one particular memory has always stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 p.m. at night when I noticed I had missed a call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go off for some privacy to return the call. I took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that's at the end leads up to the bathroom. I was going up to the bathroom and I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There were plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. There were no other campers in the nearby area, and it was pretty dark, so I chose a campsite and I sat down at the table. The lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for about 20 minutes, and as I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure was coming in my direction, where all those empty campsites were. I could see it was a person, and it's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk or anything. The people I see, though, usually have flashlights, and this person didn't. I wasn't creeped out at this point. I mean, there was no reason to be, but I was just watching curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline in that it was a man that I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down a little bit. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my cell phone, and a minute or two passes. And now, he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road, looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if he knew that I could see him, and he was staring in my direction, and I think that I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavyset and tall, and I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much in the way of facial features, but I would guess that I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s maybe. Alarm bells were going off in my head now, and my mind had turned to mush at this point. I was frozen, and I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. And then he started to move again. But this time, he was tiptoeing towards me, really carefully, like he didn't want to make any noise. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form, and it looked like he was about to charge towards me or something. In that moment, I snapped out of that mind-mushy frozen state and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite back towards the trail. I could actually hear him trampling behind me, leaves scuffling in heavy yet fast footsteps, and the footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to the narrow trail, and once he got close, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and a oof noise that came from the man, which I imagine maybe he tripped or almost tripped, or maybe he got face-slapped by a tree branch or something. Most likely, he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was, but whatever the reason, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back, and I just kept running and running and running until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still sharing laughs and smiles by the campfire, and I broke down crying and was trembling. I explained what had just happened, and my aunt spoke up and said, he probably thought that he knew you and was coming up to give you a good scare as a joke or something. She just totally dismissed me, in other words. My cousin chimed in and said, yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized that he didn't actually know you. He probably feels dumb now. And they all chuckle about it and change the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined, and the fact that I'm just a socially anxious person in general kind of let them dismiss me, I guess. I'm very cautious and shy, and for that time being, I let them convince me that I was just overreacting and overthinking.